and put a bug in legislators' ears for sure. But at the end of the day, it is pretty much controlled by the state.
Well, there's a lot of information on the internet about it. Everyone ought to look up something for not just the good, but look up the bad too.
Okay, thank you. Buddy?
Yeah, the McCleary Act, I've heard a little bit about it, haven't heard many people talk about it, but it's something I think is going to affect our school district greatly. I'd like to hear the candidates' point of views.
Okay, and where are we at
Lisa's.
Is it me?
here? Lisa's turn, all right?
Well, McCleary Act, you know, the lawsuit that required that we receive adequate funding. Basically what that looks like is they're trying to implement a schedule to increase funding for K-12, and they are hoping that it will be fully implemented by 2017-18. And kind of as a start of that, you've heard possibly about House Bill 2776. And so what they're looking at is scaling down grade levels that typically will receive a full-time teacher. So for example, now I think the kindergarten class has to have 26 students in it to receive one FTE of a teacher. And so that will be scaled down to, at some point in the near future, 24 students will receive one full-time equivalent of a teacher. And every class accordingly has a little bit different formula of what that's going to look like. And for example, right now, a typical high school class, it takes 28 students to generate one full-time teacher, and that will be moved down to 26. So in that fashion, ultimately, that's how the districts will receive, you know, more finances coming in support of K-12 education. It's much more complex than that. The bill, I think, is 47 or 8 pages long. So that's kind of the layman's term of what it looks like in the future.
Okay, John?
All right, so McCleary, here are the specific impacts for Naselle. The legislature is, they're undetermined in how they're going to implement McCleary, from year to year until the 2017 or 18 deadline. All they know is that they have to put in a significant down payment towards the McCleary decision this year. Randy Dorn, the superintendent, says that anything less than $1.4 billion is not enough. Okay? The Senate and the House budgets that they just re-released this last week are hovering at 700 to 900 million. Okay, so no one agrees about how much they need to put in or what they need to spend it on. But what we know, for Naselle, is that it looks like both budgets are going to, quote, fully fund, whatever that means, transportation, NERCs, which is an acronym for non-employee related costs. Those are materials and supplies and things like that. They're going to put a lot more money into the Learning Assistance Program, which is LAP, and they're going to try to implement full-day kindergarten based on your free and reduced lunch percentage at your school. Now, I've already been talking with OSPI to see, are we going to qualify for that full-day kindergarten funding? Because we've been providing that for the last, almost 10 years now or so. And we won't qualify for it because our free and reduced lunch percentages are not high enough. We're at about 52%, give or take. I think they told me that we would have to be in about the 70% range to qualify for it next year. But eventually, we should qualify for it if and when McCleary is fully funded. And so, right now we're kind of in a waiting game. I think we're gonna see some benefit next year. To answer Bud's question, we should get more funding in the areas that I mentioned. It looks like both budgets are also going to restore the 1.9% cuts to teachers. That's pretty much a given. They are basically putting on the back burner the COLAs again. Both budgets are doing that. So it's really up in the air, and and they seemingly can't agree on how they're going to implement McCleary at this point. But those are kind of some areas that they've kind of hinted at, so.
Okay, thank you. Further questions? Debbie?
Sure. Last time I spoke at a meeting, I talked about the morale of teachers and that it was, had pretty much hit an all-time low. So we're a small district. Everybody's, you know, the superintendent's office is open and it's not like it sits someplace else. What would you do to help morale of the teachers?
Is that John first? You're first.
I don't know who's up first.
That's a great question. You know, morale is very important, as probably everyone in here would agree. And I think that a big, something that impacts morale is communication. It seems like, especially in a small school district, I think, the communication is not at the point it should be. People start guessing about things, or maybe they hear something that's not quite right, or they're just wondering, what's this about, and that impacts morale because the unknown. To answer Debbie's question specifically, what I would like to do is I would like to form a staff advocacy group that consists of both classified and teachers that would meet with the superintendent and administrators on a regular basis, where we would talk openly about budget, about curriculum, about athletics, pretty much everything that we do up here at the school. And a big part of those meetings would be strictly a question and answer time. You know, with that group, what are your questions? Now let us answer your questions. I think that's important. I don't think that's something that's been done to this point. You know, both the teacher and classified groups could, pick, who you would want to have represent you on that committee, and I would encourage them to rotate that if they so desire. But I think it's important that we give a venue to open up the communication and do our best to provide that. The other part of morale is just being there to support the employees that we have and the county kids, and to really show that the care is there. And I'm convinced that everyone that works up here really cares about kids. I'm convinced that is a fact. We just need to continue to support that, to show that, and to offer, assistance as required. And I think being visible at community events, and whether it's athletic events or choir or FinFest or whatever, I just think having that visibility there and being a leader is going to help the morale. And so I think there's lots of things that we can do, but something specifically I would do, Debbie, would be to create a group like that we can get the communication flowing, because I think that's lacking at this point. And I think that's something that will definitely be in the, step in the right direction.
Okay. Well, my strategy for improving morale is something that I've done in other places. Is I view myself as a leader who operates in the middle, and kind of an analogy. There are some leaders who are so far out the pack that they're, down in the end zone while the rest of the group are on the 20-yard line on the far end saying, come on, this is where we need to be, come on. And then there are other leaders who are right behind you, pushing you along, but they really have no clue where you're going. And I like to be in the middle. I like to be there working with the staff, side by side, rolling up my sleeves, being involved in the issues. And I have found that to be really the best style, because when you're in the middle of it, you know what the issues are. And to me, that means being visible, being open and honest. If you're right there working right alongside, there really aren't a whole lot of secrets about what's that person doing standing on the, end zone saying, come on. I like to think of the model of working with my staff as coaching. Okay? Coaches don't usually, I know there's a coach's box, but I think in education, you can get out of the coach's box and be right in the huddle, so to speak. Another way of, morale is just to be open, honest, and transparent, be available, be visible. You don't have to operate in isolation down in your office. When it's lunch duty, come out and supervise. Hop into the room, see what's going on in the classroom. It's a lot more difficult to just make a cut and dry decision when you haven't been down watching the teachers work. I always try to keep the perspective and not forget what it was like to be a teacher. Teaching is hard work. It is harder than being a principal. You're with the kids every day. When you need a break, you can't just walk down to the staff room. You don't get diversions. You are on the clock the entire time. And one of the best ways I establish morale is just understanding what it's like to be in that position, and don't forget. When you get out of that realm, you need to remember how hard it is to be a teacher. That is pretty much wherever I've been taking care of itself. I've been fortunate to see, growth in positive morale and reduced turnover. So, I think for me, that would be the easiest part of the job, is being able to have those relationships with staff.
Okay, anything else in the community? Yes.
I would like to ask your opinion. Debbie says it's the all-time low. In your guys' opinion, is that a fact? Is that true? Is that your opinion? The morale is an all-time low?
Well, I've been here for 5 years. As my time in the district has lengthened, I've become more involved in both buildings. I did my internship. That was a couple-year process, so I spent quite a bit of time up here. And sometimes working out at the camp, maybe I'm a little more isolated. Frankly, at the camp, some of my staffers, they call me on this tomorrow, I think I'm lying, but I think with the camp staff, the morale is the best it's been in a long time. I know there are some areas of low morale up here because I've been at every board meeting for the last 5 years. So, whether we believe it's an issue or not, many people believe it is, and that is their reality. So, I think, yes, there is a lot of growth that could be accomplished in the morale area.
Thank you.
I think that people are definitely entitled to their beliefs. There's things that have occurred that definitely impact morale. And I've asked people, I said, what do you think? And they said, well, yeah, it is the worst that's been. And I think one person said 18 years. Another person said since a former superintendent who will be unnamed. And I've asked other people, and they said, no, I don't agree. I think the morale is good. And so what do I think? There's definitely room to grow. It's not perfect. It is low, I think, yeah. And I think there's things that can be done, that need to be done to improve the morale. And, how can it be low with a double bond failure too? I mean, that produces low morale in the community as well, and frustration and things like that. And I think all of that impacts all of us because we're a small community, and how can it not? And so I think there's a lot of things, Mike, that contribute to that. And I agree. And we need to move in the right direction and try and fix that.
Thank you.
Further questions from the community? Okay, now I do have one more question. Who's up? No? Okay, obviously in a small school district, we probably have maybe some different issues as far as dealing with personnel. In some cases, we have relatives that we have to maybe evaluate, good friends. So my question is, are you going to be able to effectively deal with marginally effective teachers and administrators?
Well, I'm glad you're not asking about classified staff, because that's my dad to leave.
It's a small community, and we end up with these situations at times, and the bottom line is, we've got to be able to do what's right for our kids.
Yeah,
Bottom line.
absolutely. So the question is, am I willing to, could you just repeat that one more time?
Well, are you willing to do whatever it takes to either help a marginally effective teacher, or in some cases, or even administrator, and sometimes it can be classified people, I suppose, if it's just a weak spot.
Yeah,
Are you going to be able to effectively deal with that?
absolutely. To not effectively deal with something like that is basically turning your back on the education of kids. That's why we exist up here, is to educate kids. And adults educate kids. And sometimes, well, maybe more than sometimes, adults aren't perfect, right? And so there's things that, you use the word marginal. If there is a marginal staff member, it's the duty and the responsibility of their immediate supervisor to work with that staff member, to encourage that staff member, to be an example to that staff member, to listen to that staff member, and to try and figure out, in I believe, a collaborative manner, how to improve the situation. If it doesn't work at the level of the immediate supervisor, then it gets notched up to the, well, in this school district, I guess the superintendent, because there's really just a principal and then the superintendent. So if it's not occurring at that level, it comes up to the superintendent level. And I think at that point, the superintendent needs to work with the administrator and say, okay, you know, what's going on here? Why are you having, what's the issue? What can we do to help the situation, and work in a collaborative manner to try and find a plan? You know, I guess to re-answer your question, and then I'm done, yes, I'm willing to do that, and I think it's vital that I would be willing to do that, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Lisa?
Yes, I mean, first of all, the standard is the standard. It doesn't deviate because it's a relative or a friend. You know, I will say fortunately for education, but unfortunately for the person, I have let, you know, 4 or 5 people go over the years who weren't up to standard. They weren't doing, you know, what was required of the job, and they weren't good for the classroom. Well, and being the competitive person, I guess, that I am, I mean, the last thing I'm gonna have someone saying about me is that I show favoritism to a family member. And if anything, a family or my best friend would be held to even a higher standard. I just don't feel like it's, you know, it's irresponsible. You're legally required to evaluate your employees. When you go into this business, you know that sometimes you are going to make, you know, some enemies on the job because you have to, you know, let someone go. But how many, I try to kind of put it in perspective mathematically, you know, a teacher probably has, you know, 25 to 30 students in class, 6 or 7 periods a day. Okay, how many students is that person impacting or not giving them the education they deserve, you know, over a 20 or 30-year career? So, you know, doing the right thing in that regard, when you put in that perspective, is not very hard. But like John indicated, there are steps to that process. You don't just come in and say, that was a bad lesson today, you know, you're gone. The law is very clear on what that looks like, and there's contractual language that must be followed. There are specific steps. You have to implement a plan of improvement. You have to do an observation, a follow-up, another observation, and it goes on for many months. And so, you know, yes, it requires a lot of work. Yes, I would do it, and I have done it. And, you know, that's the bottom line. It just goes with the job.
Thank you. And I might add that I think we have some tremendous teachers here, by the way. I'm not insinuating that we don't. And I appreciate all the work that the staff puts into our kids in this community. So, but sometimes, you know, in a small community, our administrators are faced with a difficult situation. And I think even in a bigger district at times too. Probably not nearly as frequent, but, so that was the reason I wanted to ask that question. Yes, David?
Sorry to interrupt at the end here, but kind of playing catch up with some of this stuff. I've heard a little bit about the bond for the gym and the trades going over there. I would like to know both of you guys' outputs as far as careers for the kids in school, college-wise and trades-wise. And if you think our trades department here in Naselle is lacking, then we're asking you for improvement.
I think it's my turn. Yeah, I just wanted, so, yeah. Yes, I would like to see our trade program grow. You know, one idea that comes to mind is, you know, I worked at Naselle weekend, and we recently received Carl Perkins vocational funding, and I spoke with the state just a couple of weeks ago, and it looks like that funding is going to continue. And while I know it's not necessarily fair to the public ed side of things, our program receives, you know, approximately $32,000 to $35,000 a year. We have to write a grant for it. Pretty much if we write an acceptable grant, we get the money. Whereas the public school gets around $2,500. And, you know, first thing that immediately came to mind is, now that I know this program is going to continue, is why couldn't we find ways to coordinate those services? For example, we recently trained 31 students at the camp to earn their wildland firefighting certificate. Well, while we may not want to mix, you know, populations, you know, we could if the space was big enough, but depending on preference, we could bring that to the public school students over Skype. So you could sit in on the training, take the exam, earn your wildfighter certificate. I know a lot of our students do go to that program already, and that would give them a leg up, either going to the college program or just getting a job, you know, right away. We need to find a way to attract, you know, people here so we can get our enrollment up and offer these programs. Another challenge, and it's sort of a philosophy issue, that, you know, something that has hampered class student numbers in our vocational programs is that our elective courses are all in the afternoons. So by nature of the schedule, when they're in the afternoons, then students are competing for all the classes at the same time. So by virtue of having them offered all at once, the class sizes go down in each one. Now, I understand the logic in doing that, because you like to have your core classes in the morning before students are off, you know, at ball games and, you know, extracurricular events, but sometimes by the very nature of where a course is on the schedule, it hampers enrollment in that program. So, you know, I think as a whole, we do need to beef up all of our opportunities. I wouldn't say just vocational, that, you know, I feel like we need to expand everything. And I know to do that, you either need better funding, more students, or people who will work for free. And the latter is really hard to come by, but yes, I'm all about more opportunities for all kids.
So the question was, you know, is there room for growth in the local area?
Well, just from when I was in myself, I think with a small community like this, not every child or every kid from Naselle is going or would like to go to college. So I think there's a lot of growth for people who don't necessarily want to go to college or high school to learn a lot more of the trades.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I think one of the traps that sometimes we fall into is that every kid has to go to college. Okay? Whether it's a university or a community college, sometimes we just kind of fall back into this thinking of, boy, the kid has got to go to college. Absolutely. I disagree with that. There are lots of really quality vocational programs out there that is not a university or a community college program that really makes a lot of good options for kids. and adults looking for work. I think in an economy where there's a lot of people looking for work, the more options we can provide to kids as they're leaving high school, whether it be training in different areas or heavy academic training, if they do want to go to university, we need to be able to provide those opportunities to our kids. Naselle, think about a typical graduating class, this year's class at 24 kids. Not all of them are going to a university. A lot of them are, but not all of them. Where are those kids going to go? They're either going into the military, they're going to a trade school, or some kind of voc school, or they're going straight into the workforce. And so I think that being a small school and having a pretty diverse population, really, I think it's important that we provide opportunities for all of those different kids. And can we improve the types of offerings that are vocational based or trade based? Absolutely. We can improve in all those areas. And I think we do a good job at what we do, but I think there's ways that we can expand that and make more relationships with different entities, as Lisa pointed out, to try and help make that even a more attractive option for those kids.
Okay, thank you. And I really appreciate that question. That was actually one that I had underlined and kind of got lost in the paper shuffle, so it is pretty important to me. So I think right at this time, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. I really appreciate the community's input. And so at this time, the board will adjourn to executive session at 8:28. And we will be in executive session to evaluate qualifications of applicants of public employment, RCW 42-20.1101G. And so we'll be back in approximately, hopefully, about a half hour.
Just one comment. I think this discussion, we're obviously trying to decide on a superintendent interim position, but this is going to be a good night, because we don't get to have these kinds of nice interactions with what people are thinking, or our staff is thinking, really in general. The variety of questions that we all ask, and the opportunity to say things. And we really need to do this more frequently than just when we need a superintendent. So it's been great.
Okay, Gilbert, at this time, we're going to hang up this phone, and I'm going to call you on my phone when we get in executive session.
Okay, I'll be standby.
Okay, thanks.